Yeah. Hey guys, so just a few housekeeping things before we get started. New people, who's new tonight? So usually we do this exercise, we go around and make you answer a question, and there's so many minutes. Maybe we'll just do a little you can answer the question. So here's an idea, right after the meetup, you can tell the first person you speak to, if you were reincarnated, what you would come back as, and why. So we'll do that as an icebreaker. So I don't want to take up too much time, we should get started without further ado. A few things, thanks to all the co-organizers. Everyone's here tonight for change.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Yeah, so Leah, Marina over here is going to be your moderator tonight. Matthew now, who's going to be running our Google Hangout, which is now happening live streaming. Dave Brown, we welcome you at the door. Sheena Medina and Megan Peters over there. And then honorary co-organizer this evening, David Speaks, as we do our warm-up to CMmeetup Summit. All right, so this is how the evening's going to go. First, we do fireside chat here with Judge Shepherd, which Leah will tell you more about, and he'll introduce himself. And then we're going to do a Q&A at the end of that. And then we'll do job announcements, and we'll do this thing called High Five, which is awesome. You'll just have to see what it's like. And Jeremy from Vine is going to do that for us. And then you should really stick around at the end. And then sometimes we'll go over for drinks at Tom and Jerry's. We do kind of have to scramble out of here, especially now because we're getting started late. So without further ado, Leah, take it away.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to thank, obviously, Meetup for having us. They provide the pizza and the drinks for most of our meetups, so that's awesome. So give them a round of applause. And tonight is special because I think, gosh, I don't even know the last time we've kind of just sat down and talked with one person. We've usually been doing panels, and I thought that this was a great opportunity to sit down and talk with Jack from BuzzFeed. CMmeetup Summit is this week. It's this Thursday, Friday. David Spinks right here. Everyone raise your hand, and I got you in the middle of the meeting. If you have any questions about CMmeetup Summit, Dave has been a part of the whole CMmeetup community since the very beginning, and we're excited to have the conference here in New York. If you didn't catch the slide earlier, if you are interested in going this Thursday and Friday, if you want to tweet with the CMmeetup Summit CMmeetup hashtags and say why you want to go to the summit, we're giving away 10 tickets tomorrow. So feel free to tweet away at some point this evening. Bonus points for pictures, video. Get creative. I mean, how much are the tickets? What's the value?
Depends if you're a startup. $4.25 $425 retail value, folks.
There you go. I feel like you guys are just almost at an auction there.
We'll throw in a free slap shot for you later. Too.
Awesome. So thank you. So Jack will be speaking at CMmeetup Summit on Thursday?
Yes.
Awesome. Great.
Right?
Right? Yeah, we decided to call this the pregame. Here we've got the pizza, so here we are to chat. So I'm going to spend maybe about a half an hour asking Jack questions, doing a little fireside chat without the fire. But then I obviously want to open it to you guys to really answer your questions. So feel free to tweet questions if you want to be a little more anonymous, or if you want to get ready to raise your hand later, please do so. So Jack, welcome.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I've got to start. I don't even want to introduce you because I feel like you will do a better job of introducing yourself. And just because you work at BuzzFeed, I'm going to assume you're going to do it a lot better than I can even introduce you. So, in a few sentences, how did you get to sitting here in this room?
Oh wow. Okay. So I started off at BuzzFeed in 2008 when there were just 8 of us, and I came on as the community manager. And the thing about that nobody ever told me is that we didn't have a community at the time. So it was 2 months of anguish until I realized that the job was actually to build a community, and then we sort of started to get things off the ground there. And so I was at BuzzFeed as a community manager in capacity of community manager for a few years. And because there were so few of us at the time, I wore a lot of different hats. I also made a lot of posts about cute animals, particularly cats. Which is passion of mine. And so a couple of years ago, I started our animals section So my title for that is Beastmaster. They let us make up our own titles. And I'm now the editorial director, which is kind of a difficult thing to describe, but it basically means that I run the part of BuzzFeed editorial that is focused in particular on creating things that people are going to want to share on Facebook. So the lists and the quizzes and the nostalgia and the cats and that particular team, as opposed to, for instance, the breaking news team or a team that's sort of not particularly that's it.
So are you the reason that cats are so popular on the internet?
No.
Okay.
So I did a lot. I've actually done a lot of research, and the thing is, it's the question is not cats, but it's why not dogs.
Okay, so we've been thinking about this all wrong.
Yeah, thinking about it all wrong. So it's going to be either cats or dogs. There's just so much more stuff about cats and dogs. That my personal theory is that dogs are trying to do more. A cat gets into a box and sort of it's because it felt like fighting times.
Right. Okay.
And a dog does it, it's just trying to impress you. But it's the flip side of that. I've actually done the research shows that the interest in cats is about equivalent to the interest in dogs. So searches on YouTube, like for cats and for dogs, are about the same. The most popular YouTube channel for an animal is actually for a dog, Mishka, the dog that says I love you.
Right.
Followed closely by Surprise Kitten. That's one of the most popular cat YouTube videos. But so I think that there may be a bias in people like me that sort of perpetuates this myth that in fact cats are more viral and more popular on the internet. And it's actually just like weird cat propaganda. So.
I didn't set you up for this, but I think that's an interesting lead-in to content. Is there a way to create a metaphor with the success of cats and like them as a way to grab attention into like, what makes content? So like, what makes successful content?
Let me try to do that with cats. And then we'll try it without cats. But I think there's something like you can, if you're a cat person or a dog person, you just agree that dogs are trying too hard. But I think that is a thing. I think when you're kind of showing that when it's really obvious what the thing is that you're trying to do, in terms of, for instance, viral marketing or something like that, people know that they're kind of being pitched to, rather than just sort of doing something that comes naturally. It's easier. So that's why I would say be a cat rather than. So the question is, what the secret to what makes things?
Yeah,
The things that we focus on in BuzzFeed, I think that have been most useful to us are thinking particularly about identity.
Yep.
And sort of what it is to be a specific identity. And that can be anything. You see a lot of posts on BuzzFeed that are kind of geared towards a particular identity. I'm vegan, so I write a lot of posts that are sort of like things you'll only understand if you're a vegan. Or if you wrestled in high school, sort of things that that kind of speak to that, whatever that identity is, that can be really powerful if it is genuine. Maybe it is genuine, and it's sort of written by somebody who actually really experiences that, because people like to share things that are about themselves. And then the other thing that we think about a lot is emotion, and writing things that sort of have a real emotional resonance. And the thing that was really useful to us early on, we started off as a content lab, where we were just trying to figure out what it was that made people want to share content. So we tried a bunch of different things. And something that was really useful in terms of a principle that we developed for how to kind of bake an imperative to sharing a piece of content was a study by a guy called John Berger that you may have heard of. It was in 2010, and he studied the New York Times most email list. And he found that all of the articles that made the most email lists, they all tended to fall into one of four distinct categories. And I'll see if I can fit them in. But it was awe-inspiring, emotional, positive, or surprising.
Okay.
And the thing about that is that if you think about it, is that people really like to share particularly positive emotions, because they're not necessarily sharing the piece of content, but they're sharing the experience that they had. Right. And so if you had a really positive experience of something sort of made you feel inspired or overwhelmed with awe or surprised at learning something new, or happy in some way, that's an experience that you want to share with your friends. So I think thinking about content in terms of generating that kind of experience, which is easier said than done, but it is a pretty useful way of looking at making something that people are going to want to share.
In the same vein that you were talking about different emotions, going back to the identity piece, Is there anything that is helpful to think about when thinking about like identity or community or brand identity?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, thinking about identity of the community in particular is something that's been a real challenge for me. I think that the BuzzFeed has been a success. BuzzFeed's community is sort of, I think it's still, even now, I mean, it's something of an experimental phase. We don't totally know what it is that we want. We're sort of getting various things from our community, and we don't know exactly sort of what it is that we want out of them. And I think that for me, to get to a point where we're going to be successful is to really be able to let people in the community use our platform to express their identity in a way that I think would be really useful for us, because if we're writing on these posts that are geared towards identity, but our staff is sort of all in New York and they work in media and they're from a specific background, they went to journalism school or something. Right. Those are interesting identities, but it's sort of a very small sort of swathe of the experience that we talk about. And so for me, I think that the real potential for community, which we've seen a little bit of at BuzzFeed, but I'd love to see more of, is actually sort of letting people know that they can use the platform to sort of talk about sort of different experiences, right, in terms of location or age or job or sort of where you're from, what we do. And I think that can be sort of a really rich area.
Can you speak a little bit more about exactly how that is implemented, or how you go about crowdsourcing that and getting like quality stuff?
Yeah, it's a kind of a difficult problem. I think that the history of BuzzFeed's community has been, it's sort of kind of a feedback loop between the editors and the community, where the editors will kind of create stuff and then the community will kind of imitate it. And the problem that happens is that the editors have the tools and the training to kind of make a really good version of it. And so what I don't want is for community to be sort of kind of a second tier version of what editors should be. But if when that happens at volume, and when we work on kind of giving people feedback and really educating the community with sort of what we've learned about how to make things to share, you eventually kind of get mutations. The community will sometimes come up with things that we never would have thought of. And then so being able to look for that and sort of promote it and then kind of get the editors to think about that and kind of make stuff like that. It's I think one of the challenges.
Could you like speak to one example, like a successful example or an interesting example of that?
I'm trying to think of something that I'm not going to speak about at CMmeetup. I think well, let me see. I feel like I need to select. Here's an example that we did that is one of my favorite things that we did on BuzzFeed sort of as a community project. Is we did song lyrics as Google Map directions, and so we just had this community thread started where people were talking about sort of what songs had directions in them, and then so we were able to take that thread actually and realize that it was this really interesting thing, and kind of turn it into actually Photoshop what the Google Map would look like if it was sort of like you start in West Philadelphia and then you end up in Delaware. And so there were a bunch of those. And so that was something that we wouldn't have been able to do without with certain, I mean we could, but we didn't think of it as editorial. And what was cool about it was that it was the story of it hadn't been generated from the community. People came together to kind of make this thing that we were then able to kind of go back and actually sort of make some media about that shared.
Cool. I mean, as someone like me who works on a brand, it's definitely a little harder to generate content. I mean, you guys, I feel like are an open book and sort of like what can be done and what can be posted, and that creates endless opportunities. I know a lot of us here work on those brands that have limitations or really technical or boring, dare I say it. Or definitely not as easy to just be like, let's create a Google map from song lyrics.
Right.
So what do you think are some, like if you had to give 3 helpful tips for someone in generating content and thinking of our brand identities, thinking about potential emotions that we can help tap into, like what would those tips be to create really engaging content?
To create branded content. I think one thing would be to kind of, this is just thing that people work on brands do all the time, is figure out what it is, what the story is that and then I think that if it's the other thing is probably not being something that you're not. I think it can be really problematic when people create branded content. It's sort of that is trying to meet. But there tends to be a sweet spot. I think that we do a lot of, I mean, obviously our model of BuzzFeed, our ad model is social advertising. And we've worked with a lot of brands to kind of create things that people want to share. And so the stuff that has worked in terms of working with brands works really well is when a little bit when brands are able to meet us halfway. Mm-hmm. I think there's an understandable sort of it will happen sometimes that people will be very protective of their assets and not want to change it into a particular way. I think that when BuzzFeed early on when we were trying to do advertising ran into a real problem where people were just completely unwilling to come along the path and sort of let us create things for them. And I think that now the sort of social spaces have opened up in terms of advertising, so that's something that people think about now, and so it's easier for us to do that. But something that we do that I think is particularly successful, and this is something that a lot of the things that we do in terms of social advertising are things we've learned from what's worked editorially, is we try a lot of different things. BuzzFeed started off as a lab for content. And the idea was we would try a bunch of different things and iterate on the things that were successful, and we would start the losers. So if we had made something that we had spent a lot of time working on that we thought was going to be sort of a big hit, and it wasn't, it would still get the same treatment on the homepage as something that we have a cool video that we found that we just threw up there. And it needs to speak for itself. And I think that tends to be true for branded content as well. We'll try about 5 or 6 different treatments of the subject from different directions, and the stuff that's actually getting shared is the stuff that we show people. And so the difficult thing is to learn not to be precious about sort of the thing that you thought was going to be a huge hit, and people weren't sharing it. There's ultimately a lot of that people like it, or what's in the game team that they share it. And so we have technology that sort of helps us to do that. And I think that's true both for brand publishing content and also for editors. A lot of times editors will want a second chance on the homepage, but with some exceptions, we usually don't give it because it doesn't get shared the first time.
Right. So what do you deem success at BuzzFeed? Like, what is successful content?
So I feel like the core thing, the core principle of BuzzFeed, the sort of driving principle is that we want to make things people share. And what that means is that the way it's sort of built into our editorial philosophy, and actually if you look at BuzzFeed dashboards, which I think you can see the dashboard for particular posts, we separate out the traffic that's what we call seed traffic and the traffic that we call social traffic. And that means that if somebody's coming to the homepage and they click on something, if they're already there, they go to BuzzFeed.com and they click on something, we would call that seed traffic. Those people are kind of, they're money in the bank as long as you're taking care of them, the people who already come to your site and invested in what you're doing. And so that's useful because you need some of that in order to kind of to achieve escape velocity and get something that really goes viral and that takes over the web. But the stuff that we're really interested in is the social traffic that's on top of that. So the traffic that comes from Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or from another source that's not BuzzFeed. And so in practice, an editor could kind of game the system by making a really clicky headline. You know, like, I don't know, like this video will change your life. You know, like I don't know, whatever. Two people walk into a room, you'll never believe what happens next. And you know, like not the content is either good or bad, but you can gain the click that way, and you could maybe have a salacious thumbnail, you know, or something sexist, and you're going to get tons and tons of clicks. But our editors are sort of wired that if we did something that had 100,000 clicks and like only 10 shares, that would be a massive failure. And on the flip side of that, it means that we're able to do stuff that has a lower reach that's really interesting. So the ceiling for it would be like 100,000 people about a particular community, like this saying, or about a very specific identity. Mm-hmm. But you can look at it, and if it only got 1,000 clicks, but it got 90,000 shares, that's something that our editors are sort of required to realize is a huge success. And so sort of being built in that way, kind of like learning that thing.
Yeah, I think that's an important tip for everyone, and sort of thinking about not just getting people to click or see something, but getting some share, and obviously the viral nature of that. I mean, just our last meetup, I thought a particular one of the nuggets, that tweetable moments that was said there that has really stuck with me is you can get anyone to click, but you can't get everyone to share. And so I think kind of relating that back to that identity and emotion part is like speaking to getting people to share. So it's just
yeah, and the cool thing, the thing that I like about that particular model is, and we've been through a lot of sort of different phases of trying to figure out how to make content viral on BuzzFeed. And when I started off, a big part of that was SEO, and kind of figuring out search, and the thing about search and the search model is that trying to game Google is interesting, but it's not necessarily going to make your content super high quality. And I think we figured out ways that when we were thinking a lot about search, we wanted to give people the thing that they were looking for. And sometimes that was like a boring thing to be like how to download, like I don't know, the Avengers movie online. And we would, link to some sites where they could maybe try and figure that out. So you're getting what you want, but it's not super interesting content. But I think the thing about if the game is trying to figure out how to get people to share it, the end product can only be something that's good and interesting. And so it really, really keeps our editors honest. And so even if they're going after traffic, they can only really go after traffic in a way that is high quality, engaging, and interesting. Because you can't trick issues.
How do you source content? Like how, for all of us, I know we all have different communities, but where do you guys get the inspiration from? How's that process? And walk us through, how at BuzzFeed that process is. And I think I actually also, to play off of that, had a question from Emily. I do read responses when we ask, what would you like to ask Jack? But one of the questions was, when does the social strategy play into content? Does it happen the minute you're like, we're going to make this post, and then, maybe this is how we're going to optimize it for the platforms? Can you walk us through a little bit about that start to finish?
Well, there's two different things. I think in terms of, we do a lot of work trying to figure out how, because people always, when they start at BuzzFeed, always think they're going to which is a totally understandable thing, but it actually just never happens. And the real secret is just the more that you do, the more ideas that you have. And so we try to we don't have pitch meetings, and we don't I mean, on my team at least, I'm in the sort of what we call the Buzz team, the cats, 90s.
Yeah. Saved by the Bell. That stuff.
Sort of which X-Men are you?
Right.
But so we don't have pitch meetings, and we don't really assign stuff, and so people are it can be kind of terrifying. You could kind of come into work and you just literally sort of your job is to make a bunch of stuff, which is awesome, but at first can be difficult. So we try to have instead of having the structure of pitch meetings and assignments, we try to give people structure by giving people a lot of brainstorms and a lot of sort of places where they can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And we do a lot of things in brainstorms. My favorite particular thing was I was talking about the two pillars of sort of identity and emotion. And so we'll do a brainstorm when we think about specific identities, and then we'll list a bunch of emotions and then put them together and see what happens. So if you let's say the emotion is disappointing, and the identity is cat lover, then you can look at the frames for content that we have and do something like getting a cat, expectations versus reality. And so it can be a really great way to generate stuff. It's going to speak to an emotion. And so just sort of thinking in that way about content is really, really useful. And then to answer the second part of your question, I think that it's actually become the case recently in the last 6 months or so that our Facebook page is now big enough that it drives a substantial amount of traffic to the post. We didn't used to think about putting stuff on Facebook or Twitter any more than we would think about putting stuff on the home. The thing about it is that goes under a little bit goes under the category of seed. It gets complicated, but it's sort of the point is that this is sort of the built-in audience that you already have, and the people that we're interested in reaching are the people who haven't already sort of subscribed to our Facebook page, or who haven't decided to bookmark BuzzFeed as a search. Do people still navigate to URLs? I don't know. And so it is. So we don't have a huge strategy around what we're going to do with the thing afterwards, except in the technology, which is just merciless in terms of it will show people stuff that's doing well. And so we circulate stuff in the thumbnails, and you're more likely to see stuff that's doing well. We'll also do things that we get a little bit more granular with it. if you come to this site and you haven't been in a month, you're probably more likely to see stuff that is sort of evergreen. So we're pretty good about that sort of thing. But in terms of the social strategy, the editors don't really have a direct line to the guy. His name is Samir, by the way, the guy who runs it.
Okay.
And he's coveted, but he just kind of picks and chooses.
Picks and chooses.
What goes on based on these same principles.
Is there any, any optimization with the different platforms? Like, do you know if there's any sort of different way of looking at Twitter than Facebook, or just kind of pick and choose what's going on?
I think so. I think something that has been particularly useful to us over the past few years is really thinking about writing for platforms. And so the stuff that's going to do well on Twitter and stuff that's going to do well on Facebook, there's some Venn diagram that's sort of, that's some stuff that's really, really well. The thing about Twitter is there's kind of a ceiling for the traffic that you get from Twitter, which is less true with Facebook. But writing particularly for Pinterest is really, I think Pinterest is one of our top 3 referrers. And so thinking about what it is that audience wants, it's going to be a different editorial process to think about what it is that people are likely to share on Facebook. Though the two things tend to pay off each other. But I think that thinking about writing for platforms is really important. I know that our politics team and our news team will write headlines that can be obscene. So they're thinking a lot about Twitter as a platform, and my team is thinking probably more about Facebook. It's kind of not a super useful distinction, because usually it's doing well on Facebook or also.
Right. But interesting to know. Is there anything, looking back when you were a community manager to where you are now, like how have things shifted for BuzzFeed, or what did you do to get started and build that community?
Let's see. After panicking. I think the thing that looking back, the thing that was most, and I didn't articulate it to myself this way at the time, but looking back, the most useful things that I did with community was thinking about the feedback mechanisms that I had available to me, and really kind of optimizing them. And at the time, that was sort of was emailing with every individual who sort of signed up, and then kind of figuring out how to scale that, and then promoting the things that people were doing, and sort of really letting people have it. Because if you make a post, if you sign up for BuzzFeed and you make a post, there's this sort of valley that can happen where you'll make something and then you post it, and then literally nothing happens.
Right.
And so I wanted to try to figure out ways for that not to be the case, whether they would get an email from me or be promoted to the front page in some way. And so that was particularly useful. And we also did a lot of collaborative projects to try to get people. And the more that we did those, the more that the projects could happen. So I think thinking about community as a place where people could really, that was actually just an extended playground for us, because we were a content lab and because we sort of so focused on just iterative development and figuring out what works and doubling down on it. That community was really good for us to do that with different communities who really needed that. It was really useful.
How did you go about scaling? Like you would say you would email someone, and that was great that you made sure like everyone sort of got acknowledged as best as possible for taking the time to submit. How did that scale?
I just make my community team work harder.
Okay. All right. How many people did you have on your team?
No, they work there. So right now, my community team is 3 people, which is not a lot for our editorial team is something like 100 people. Wow. And so our community team is still pretty small. I'd like to get that big. But we have some stuff that's automated. We also focus particularly on. I think what we found early on is that for what our community was, we were particularly interested in the super users and less interested in having the huge numbers of registered users. And so once we made that decision, whether right or wrong, that helped us scale a lot.
Right. Just saying that the 20% of people creating the 8% of whatever that rule is, that apparently applies to everything.
Hey guys, can you speak up to the back there?
So with that too, I don't know how many of you guys in the room sort of crowdsource content or want to crowdsource content from the community. Okay. Any tips for that? Like, how does one get started trying to manage and really inspire people in the community to get involved and really become a part of it?
I think that the thing that I wish I'd known early on is to really think through what it is that you want, what the end result is going to be out of a piece of sort of a crowdsourced thing. I can only speak to what BuzzFeed has done, but it can be really easy to do something. We'll do these collaborative projects where sort of if we do something like, what's your favorite movie? What you're going to get, that sounds great because you're going to get this high volume of response. But the thing that you're going to get is a bunch of people being like, Pulp Fiction, which is like the most boring, like just like a bunch of like text responses.
Not the movies.
Names of popular films.
Right.
So trying to figure out the balance between sort of volume of response and quality of response was a very difficult thing to do. But I think that it's a mistake that a lot of people make, and I certainly made early on, where I just didn't think it through. And I think this is a thing that is true editorially as well. When we're trying to make something that you want to share, is I ask my editors always to do a gut check. If something didn't make, if a cat picture didn't make you say "aw" out loud, I don't want to see it. You know? Right. That's the barrier. You know, that's the hallmark for quality. But it's surprising how easy it is to kind of fall into a pattern where you're not doing that. Where you look at something and you're like, oh, this didn't particularly inspire me, but I'm sure once we get a lot of these, it'll do really well. And so I think doing that gut check and thinking in advance about would you want to answer this question, and if you did, what would you say? And then if the thing that you said that you thought of was like really funny or interesting or clever, then you're onto something, and that's great. Put it on the site. But if it's not, if you can't answer it yourself, or if you can only answer it with something boring, I wouldn't bother with it. And that's something that I learned over years of sort of anguish and getting it wrong.
So how would you take that movie question and make it more interesting or more engaging?
I think maybe if you add an emotional element to that, you could do something like, what's a movie that always makes you cry? Or you can look at it, you can think about it in terms of making it more specific or less specific. It's one really useful lens. So what would be, so the way to make that less specific would be thinking about a scene from a movie. What's the saddest scene from a movie ever? And then what would the media be? Would it be a GIF? What GIF makes you cry every time you do a film? Something like that. I don't know that I'm thinking about that Futurama episode where the dog waits for him.
That was the saddest thing.
Right? So that like the GIF of that dog waiting, maybe waits for him like whole life dies. But like, so spoiler. But so just seeing that for anybody who's watched that episode, there's this immediate visceral response. So that's sort of like taking the original idea, which is fine, it's going to get a high volume, and narrowing it down so you're going to get some volume of response, but thinking about emotion, particularly about specificity, and either going really sort of specific with it or getting really wide with it, can be. And there are a lot of useful tools that you can do that makes it work in that way.
Interesting. So can I put you on the spot a little bit?
Okay.
I didn't prep him for this, but I think, again, we've been talking about the identity and motion, and I think it's helpful when you start to play into like tangible examples. But I want to sort of challenge that and going to, a brand or like something technical, maybe something, quote, boring or harder, and open it up to someone to give an idea of something to challenge you to create interesting content or like content that speaks to identity or emotion and really how to make something interesting out of that. So, so volunteers and anyone who wants to just like shout out something that you want to challenge Jack to make interesting in content.
Developers and engineers.
Okay, well that's great. I mean,
developers and engineers.
Developers and engineers are super interesting. So that's it. I think that's an easy one. I think the thing for me is that the obvious thing that comes to mind is the specific identity of the developer. is very strong. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen the IT crowd, but that immediately resonates where the thing is always, that's what that is, that's what the IT crowd is. It's sort of like what we call ID post, an identity post for developers. But so, have you tried unplugging and plugging back in again? So that's one thing that developers are constantly having to say to their family. So maybe it's like, if you're a developer, people are always asking you to fix your computer. If you're a developer, people are always asking, So there it is, 100 questions that developers are tired of answering. Would be really interesting about this. And sort of it's cool because everybody who is a developer is like, yeah, this is my life. And everybody who's not a developer, but who's sort of maybe married to a developer, who's a developer friend, will send it to them and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I asked you all this."
Right. It's funny you say that because my mom actually just sent me an email today about gluten. She has celiac disease, so it's the questions people with celiac are sick of answering, and she just emailed me that random. I'm running it. So, but again, speaking to identity and forwarding it to people that might be aware of, educators share that.
Sorry, but thinking about that, I just want to do a million posts on this. But so thinking about, so if you use this idea of specificity, and so that's a fairly broad version of it, but a narrower version of it would be to think about things that only developers will understand, and that sort of you have a smaller sort of discourse community around who can talk about it. But in some ways, that's even more engaging because it's these in jokes, people making C++ jokes, or,
right?
It's sort of funny to 4 people who laugh, but that's the thing.
Right.
And so that can be super viral within a community rather than sort of in this box. So kind of taking it small and then taking it big is really useful.
Well, I want to do it one more time.
Okay,
another one. Oh, I can't choose. Oh. What?
Atheist.
Okay, how about I'm gonna let you pick which one you want to do. So
just post something on Reddit, you're fine.
Atheist, finance, and mouthwash. Faith, non-denominational specific, Bud Light. No, Bud Light's too easy. Gotta pick one of the hard, gotta pick something a little more challenging.
This also my hot topics to me.
Should we go with mouthwash?
Yeah.
That's the one that seemed hardest right off the bat. This is sort of the thought. This is another thought experiment, that there's a word for it. It's called morphological analysis. But you take a thing, and it's essentially free association. You take a thing, you take a concept, and you see what the next thing is that makes you think of. And so mouthwash, it would be bad breath, and sort of bad breath to me would be sort of problems when you're dating somebody. And so I think that I'm glad my girlfriend is not here. But so I think that's so one thing you can drill down into that specific thing, how to tell people they have bad breath, or that's a piece of content that I'm sure mouthwash brand would sponsor. Or you could take that as one item that's sort of the 15 worst things about being in a new relationship, or relationships, expectations versus reality is another thing for that. Where sort of they look beautiful. You need the newest Listerine product, or
Right.
But yeah, that's something that I think that in terms of a brand too. That obviously would be a question about what the story is that brand wants to tell, and that maybe not want to focus on that breath.
Right. So it goes back to the storytelling part.
So if I were working with them, I would want to have to figure that out and then think about what the identity is.
Okay. So I want to ask one more question, and then I want to open up to everyone. And this is another one where someone submitted what they wanted to ask. So this is Ariel, and I thought this was great. What's the greatest thing you ever found on the internet, and do you remember how it made you feel?
Wow, that's a good question. Greatest thing ever? We talk about. Oh man. I'm going to talk about instead the first thing that comes to mind that was really cool. Is that there's this thing called pentametron where somebody wrote a bot that found every tweet that was written and accidentally written pentameter. and had it assembled into Shakespearean sonnet. And it's like it's well worth looking at because they're these like profoundly terrifying pieces of poetry that are generated by a bunch of different tweets that people have no idea happen to be in it.
Well,
It's a wonderful.
will you be tweeting that out later so we can all
I'll
spend our
send it
nights
around.
going
And
to
this
bed
is-
reading?
It's like that particular question I was asking for a job interviews and I was
Oh my god, I don't know.
like,
Yes.
what's your favorite thing on the internet? And you're just like your mind goes.
Maybe that's a question we can all answer over Twitter. You know, what's your favorite thing on the internet? Everyone can share that out.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing to have in terms of job interviews.
Good question.
People like things. I think that's something that's one of the number one things I look for when I'm hiring somebody is that they like things a lot.
Yeah.
And that they like specific things. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I wanna stop talking and I wanna open it up to questions in the audience. So since Topher already has his hand in the air, we'll go with him. Kick it off.
I'm curious, you're a little separated from the community side now, but from an editorial aspect, how do you balance the newsworthy / social commentary posts with, appealing to the diehard fans and then also the people who BuzzFeed is looking for? How do you balance those?
I think that, I in a lot of ways, the content tends to find its audience that we've discovered. And so we think about the homepage of BuzzFeed in a similar way that what your Facebook feed might be like. And I think people now, it didn't used to be the case, but people now are very, very used to it. It's very natural for people to experience, you look at your Facebook feed and you'll have, somebody will be sharing their cute pictures of their cat, or somebody will be announcing that they got married, and then somebody will be talking about the situation in Ukraine, kind of all in one place. And people are smart and used to looking at all that in one place and figuring out where they want to go. And so we have a philosophy of pretty much letting that happen naturally. I think that would probably change if there was a big breaking news event to some extent. But we've sort of made mistakes in the past. I think that when sometimes, a couple of years ago when we were first trying to figure out how to have a fairly robust news team, we ended up locking down the site, and it was all when there was a really huge sort of tragic news event. And that I think that was problematic. That wasn't necessarily what people wanted. They wanted maybe a splash or sort of somewhere, if they just came to the site and didn't know what was going on, they wanted an update. But I think actually providing a lot of different kinds of content, it's been a really sort of good method for us.
So you asked a little bit about like the why people contribute or how you get them to contribute. I'd probably dig deeper into like what's like the basic human motivations for wanting to contribute to something else. Is it more than just traffic, or how would you do that in very early days before you had traffic?
Yeah, I think so. I think early on when people didn't know what BuzzFeed was for the most part, so it wasn't a big site, and most people hadn't heard of it. The idea was that what the site was, the way that we thought of ourselves was that we were a place to kind of surface cool new things that were happening, the sort of trends. Every post was written in a way that answered the question, what's happening? And so the people that became our community in those days were people who also thought of themselves that way. Sort of the people who saw the gaming style video a week before everybody else did. And so finding those people and sort of creating a platform for those people was pretty successful for us. Because those people also knew about BuzzFeed, which is this kind of cool thing way before its time. And so that was what the community was. And I think that they've, to a large extent, grown along with us. And they'll see the stuff that's my favorite stuff that happens like communities when people will see something. If an editor does a post that's sort of 15 things you'll only understand if you went to a liberal arts college. I love it when a community person does something that's sort of 15 things you'll only understand like if you went to like Newark Elementary School. Something that's like for only like 20 people will run. But then everyone will be like, oh yeah, you had Mrs. Allen in first grade. And so that stuff, I think that's really cool. Seeing that stuff happen is awesome. So I think it's a challenge. I don't think we're great at it. I don't think we're great at letting people know that that's the thing. But I think that I think that when people do realize that, it's awesome to be able to use this platform and also to use sort of what the BuzzFeed means to sort of share with your group of friends. It's sort of something, 15 reasons, Lucy should go to prom, as opposed to sort of like just for one person, sort of it's a BuzzFeed post. I think that's a really good reason to sign. That can get bigger or smaller.
Has anyone used the platform to propose?
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah. She said yes.
Good. Well, that's good. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. I know it's been a lot about users, but can we get back into the office? So I work for a company where we have individuals who are very much on a different scale of how they use digital marketing. And so have you had any experience of like trying to garner your team to kind of stay compatible? Did they figure out how you navigated that?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to help you in particular, because the problem that we had was as we got bigger, was the people that were coming to us and still are on my team, people who are kind of coming out of college, or people who were really good at the internet, which doesn't necessarily mean that you went to journalism schools.
Right.
But also when we're trying to do real reporting, and so we have an investigative reporting team, getting people who kind of come from a different background, who sort of spent 5 years working in a magazine. That can kind of cause some friction in terms of maybe friction is the wrong word, but people have some totally different goals and different ways of approaching things. The thing that I've done that for my team in particular is I've really guarded our process, and I've been very careful not to let sort of these outside influences change the way that we do things. And so there's been sometimes been pressure to be like, well, you should have post quotas, or you should have pitch meetings, or you should have sort of these things that work for other companies, but that aren't what was at the core of what BuzzFeed was about, which is very much experimental and sort of iterative, and giving people freedom to kind of try things and fail, and that being okay. And so as we've scaled, for me, sort of the biggest challenge, and I think one of the most important things in my role, sort of managing a team of 50 or whatever, is making sure that our process sort of stays intact. And sort of you can't have 50 people going to break for a meeting, so we've had to figure out sort of, we divide them into teams of 5 or 6 who kind of work together on particular stuff. That sort of thing. But thinking a lot about process and what it is that's core to the company. And then fighting to keep that intact, I think is something that's been useful. And BuzzFeed is a pretty cool place to like people have been receptive to that and sort of.
Megan?
I've noticed on BuzzFeed there a quiz pops up, and then all of a sudden there's loads of other quizzes about niche topics. The question is, how do you get your team, your content creation team, thinking of original ideas, or do you not? Is it more formulaic, templatized approach?
I think we do. I think that's. I mean, this kind of comes back to the process thing. We have a huge focus. It's two things. We have a huge focus on experimentation. So we want a lot of people to be thinking about new stuff all the time and new formats. And like, you don't want people to you don't want it to be It's funny because it was like 6 months ago. Everybody was like, when are they going to get tired of this? And then it's only been like, a few months. And it was like, when are they going to get tired of quizzes? But the thing about that is that we've been the first quiz that we did in 2008. We built the technology to make quizzes, and we've been doing them since then. And it was only fairly recently that they really took off on the web for a number of reasons. But the reason that it happened is that we never actually gave up on that format. We were doing these lists that were working, but they were also occasionally would be still experimenting with new formats. And so we have a big focus on people kind of trying new stuff, as well as sort of, when something hits big, the editors sort of will all do it, which I think is good. Though in some ways it can feel like a little bit of an overload, especially at first. But the system is built to be flexible. So right now, what people are doing, the editors who are doing quizzes are also watching how they're received, and they're also making other kinds of stuff. And I don't know what the next big format's going to be, but we think a lot about format and trying to develop format. that's when we do a lot of sort of brainstorming around how to keep that fresh.
Mine kind of has to do with that question, but kind of in a different way. So basically my question is content. There's a lot of different, you were talking about how you kind of pinpoint with like a specific niche. And how do you get your experts to, obviously you're not, the people who are writing about it aren't always like on that niche that they're writing. They're not always involved. Even though you have so many editors when you were smaller, how do you kind of get them to be an expert at and really be able to understand that specific niche?
I think that, the thing that I would never do is I wouldn't want someone to write about an identity that they didn't have. And so we're pretty, we don't have to be strict on that because people just don't do it. It's built into our architecture that people don't really do it. Because you can tell, I think. You can tell if somebody's sort of trying to adopt an identity that's not, sort of 15 things you'll only understand if you're a plumber. And it's like you work in media. But so I think we essentially don't do that. And this is, for me, this is what I was talking about before. This is where community has so much potential. Is that the answer to that is that we just have gaps. I think sometimes we try to fill those gaps through hiring. But I'm sort of somewhat wary of trying to get too many specialists. We have people who write about, particularly about sort of parenting, which is a really big topic. And I wouldn't want people writing about sort of things you'll understand if you're a parent, if they weren't actually a parent. But so with other smaller topics, if we don't have that expertise, we wouldn't write about it. That's where I sort of want to see stuff from the community that we never would be able to do.
Time for a few more questions.
I have a bunch of Twitter too.
Oh, okay. Let's first go back corner.
What's your strategy for long-form content? And what have you found? What works really well and what has kind of failed in that?
I think that sort of being somewhat content agnostic in general from the start helped us be in a position where we could hire a great guy, this guy Steve Gandel, who's really thought about how to make long form content that people want to share, and just do it. We had the CMS for it, and the core principles were still the same, and we treat the content pretty much the same way. And so we've had. I think the ceiling, like, it's harder to get something that gets 10 million views. That's 10,000 words. But we've had a number of long form pieces that have had well over 2 or 3 million views, which is a huge hit for us. And the secret is the same as it's similar to what it is with. The thing about the lists is that lists are just a tool you use to tell a story. It's just one particular format. And you can write there's like the range of what a list is can be from sort of really, really bad and boring to sort of really profound to sort of really sort of well structured and beautifully written. And so if you take the things that go into that and just decide to do it with paragraphs, you're going to be okay. And we have. We treat it the same way in the long form stuff. We experiment with it, and some of the stuff does really, really well. I think one thing that we found with long form is that people are reading it on mobile in particular. People are kind of saving it and reading it in the evenings on their devices. And so thinking about context for when somebody would have time to read something is useful. But I think it's a myth that people don't take the time to read long stuff on the internet. It just has to be good.
It's interesting you say that because I found myself, on BuzzFeed's Facebook, they shared that the author who's searching for the killer of her daughter, she was the one who wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer, in that book series before it was turned into a movie. And I found myself, I was, gonna maybe, it's BuzzFeed, I'll take 10 minutes. And a half, 20 minutes later, I'm still reading this article, but I couldn't put it down because I was so interested in that. And, played into photo and it played into the long form. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. So do check out their long form stuff as well. I'm gonna go to Natalie for one question from Twitter, and then I hope that you, at your leisure over the next day or something, can take a look too at some other questions on Twitter and get back to people. But Natalie, if you had to pick one question.
Oh, it's tough. Two, because I think they're both quick.
Okay.
Is geo-targeting option for brands in the works?
I don't know. We have to speak to her.
Do you okay, let's skip over that one then. Told you to be quick. As far as Pinterest being a top, one of the top 3 referrals, there's been some interest in that comment. So would you say that it's likely from BuzzFeed's own content or from users' posts that a lot of this referral comes?
I would guess that the most of the stuff from Pinterest goes to our DIY section. So stuff that's about life hacks and sort of do-it-yourself and sort of stuff that you can make in your home that looks cool. It tends to do really well on Pinterest. That's not strictly true. Our animal stuff does well on Pinterest, and stuff that's funny, which is sort of kind of just that's difficult to quantify. But the DIY stuff is the stuff that, and the DIY team, which is now a team of 3 or 4 people, their mandate is to think about Pinterest, which is sort of not true of other people who work sort of on my team. We're more thinking about Facebook, but the DIY team are really, really thinking about Pinterest.
And do you think it's likely out of discovery, or do you think it's like followers are kind of like look at the Pinterest, the BuzzFeed Pinterest feed?
Yeah, I think it spikes a little bit on weekends. I think it's people who sort of want to do these cool projects and sort of kind of are bookmarking it and going back and sort of finding stuff that they can do around the house, or maybe some things that they have a little bit of time for, that's my guess is that people are actually trying to do the Pinterest stuff, which can be a mixed bag with stuff that does well. I don't know if you've seen the stuff going on Pinterest with people trying to bake those Sesame Street cookies, and they turn into these monsters.
like cake breads and stuff, like cake breads, yeah. All right, one more from the audience.
Obviously, it comes in waves. We hear about social media fatigue, and is this generation becoming exhausted with sharing content? And I wonder if BuzzFeed, if you guys sit around and ever think about that. Like, what if suddenly this spigot gets turned off, or the social media? I realize social media is going to be with us in some form of fashion, but is that a conversation you all ever speak about these hypotheticals?
I don't think that we've ever talked about what would happen if everybody stopped sharing things. I do think that that's kind of the future.
Yeah.
We have talked about the platform that people use to share things. I think that's going to change. And so that's something that we're very aware of. Is that, I don't know what the future of Facebook is going to be, and I don't want to necessarily speak to it, but I think it would be maybe foolish to be totally 100% reliant on Facebook and not thinking about other places. And I don't know, messaging apps, and there's sort of huge user base for WhatsApp and that sort of thing, Snapchat, so we think about it, and the way that we deal with it is that we think a lot about writing for platforms and think about what different kinds of content is going to work on different platforms. And we're lucky in that we're built to be experimental, so people sort of have the freedom to try, instead of just chasing a Facebook hit, our editors have the freedom to spend a lot of time, if they wanted to, trying to figure out how to write something that would do well on different platforms, even if the ceiling's going to be lower, because we look at stuff in terms of sort of ratio of shares rather than number of shares. That's something that people are kind of free to do.
So if you had to leave us with one just evergreen sort of tip on content and one thing to keep in mind, what would that be?
One tip.
One thing.
Cats.
Cats.
I really love them. They're better than nobody searches for dogs. Nobody writes about dogs.
No.
Nobody wants to read about them.
Unless they're being shamed.
Yeah,
right. Okay, what is number 2? I don't want number 1, I want number 2.
The thing that I talked a little bit about this in terms of a gut check. I think that the number one thing, the thing that I talked about in terms of people liking things is useful. And so liking things and being passionate about things in terms of creating content, that kind of shows through. And our editors write about stuff that they love. And I think that sort of that feeling is something that you take that actually makes people want to share because it comes through. And part of that, which is my one real tip is developing empathy and really being able to thinking about what it would be like for the person who's sharing it. And especially if you're writing something for someone to put on Facebook, they have to take ownership over that. And so if it's full of your opinion or sort of something about you or self-aggrandizing, or not, or it's not sort of built with sort of an emotion sort of that a lot of people have,
Right.
somebody taking ownership over that for their feed is less likely.
Right.
So I think sort of having empathy is another way of talking about having editorial judgment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you have any questions for Jack, I hope you'll stick around for a little bit, or tweet ex-president, answer any questions and get that dialogue going. For those of you who are new to Meetup, this is the time where we let Jack have another beer, and we're gonna go into a high five. Jeremy will be